Good afternoon and welcome to this panel of our conference. I want to begin by thanking the Kellogg Institute at the University of Notre Dame and the Center for Migration Studies, who are the organizers of this conference and of this wonderful panel. I'm Timothy Matovina. I'm in the Theology Department at the University of Notre Dame, and our panelists today are wonderful panelists. You can find their biographical sketches on the conference website. Our topic today is how we mainstream Catholic teaching on immigrants and refugees into Catholics and in Catholic institutions. And our panelists do come from a variety of contacts that are going to enrich this conversation, including the Catholic Press, United States Conference of Catholic Bishops Subcommittee for Pastoral Care, Migrants, Refugees, and Travelers. We have a diocesan leader and two university leaders. So let's begin with a question that I'll address to all on the panel. In your particular context, working with Catholics, working with Catholic institutions, what has been your greatest success and your greatest challenge in your efforts to promote formation in Catholic social teaching on migrants and refugees? Your greatest success and your greatest challenge. Brian is a Catholic journalist. Would you begin, please?
Absolutely. Hi, great to be here. So as for my biggest success, I'll just say that in my capacity as a journalist, I'm been privileged to tell the very human stories of migrants and refugees, and I've been able to interview DACA recipients, and sort of let people know a little better idea of who they are. But a couple years ago, I interviewed a sweet-natured, intelligent high school girl who was like any kid her age, except for the fact that she was undocumented and that she had a DACA status. And I believe the headline to that story was something like "They Are Us," which sort of brought home the message that refugees and migrants are our neighbors. They're just like you and me, and the vast majority of whom just want to have a normal life and sort of the chance to maximize the human potential. And on the macro level, I've also been able to interview immigration attorneys, policy experts, sort of like let people know the very real world implications that that these debates in Washington have for real people on the ground in our communities. Everything from DACA to family separation. Most importantly, to let I think a Catholic audience to know how our current immigration system and policy, how it stacks up against Catholic social teaching on migration. And on that front, about 2 years ago, I had a chance to write a primer of sorts for our Sunday Visitor on Catholic social teaching and the principles that undergird our teachings on migration. And my aim there was to really not to delve into like partisan politics or like American political debates so much as it was to sort of lay out the principles of what they were. So just to inform Catholics, because oftentimes we don't know. The biggest disappointment, however, I'd say in dealing with all this is that I think the reality that many people, Catholics are no different, sort of, they view politics, immigration included, through their own sort of personal ideological lens instead of through Catholic social teaching. For example, with that article, the primer I wrote on Catholic social teaching on migration, some of the negative feedback I received was that I didn't, I gave lip service or didn't focus enough on enforcement and the rights of nations to enforce their border laws and deport undocumented, which I would respond to that would be that, of course, nations do have a right to enforce immigration laws. That is a principle in Catholic social teaching, but that is not the animating or principle of our teaching on migration. Rather, it's solidarity and human dignity. So I think in the end, breaking through that sort of partisan framework that people have when they view this issue, I think has been the most difficult thing I've experienced.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian. Can we want Brett? Are you still with us right now?
I'm still with you.
Okay, Brett. Brett from the university context.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Tim. And I wanted to say thanks to Brian for that primer on Catholic social teaching. That was I got a lot of good feedback on that.
Brett, on my computer, I'm not hearing you too loudly. Could you turn the volume up a little bit?
Sure.
Thank you.
Does that help?
A little better.
Okay. I will try to project too. So anyway, for me, especially in teaching both at the university and at the context of at the parish level when I was in ministry, I think people sometimes find Catholic social teaching to be abstract. And so to me, the most effective successes I've had, similar to what Brian was saying, is in connecting the stories or concrete details to the principles. And I've done this in teaching by in a parish cohort, a parish group, and also in a grad cohort. It was people that knew each other, trusted one another, and they were able to share their own family immigrant stories, their own immigration stories in ways that were powerful and kind of gave flesh to the principles of Catholic social teaching. In my undergraduate classes, I bring in speakers. I bring in speakers, and I had, for example, an undocumented lawyer speak with them. And I also take them to a shelter across the border so that they can talk to people who have actually been deported. And once they do that, they begin to say, oh, I know why there's a right to migrate in Catholic social teaching, because of that family that was being shaken down by a gang in Central America and needs to escape that. I know why there's a principle against separating families, because of the sorrow of the men that I met at the shelter who've been separated from their families. They become persons, not just statuses or categories. And I think that makes Catholic social teaching come alive. The kind of caveat is that personal storytelling can be risky. It can only be done in a context where people are respectful, where stories cannot be abused, and where the conditions are egalitarian. So somebody's not being used to be for entertainment or something. In terms of struggle, I think there's an easy blurring between the moral and the legal, and an association between illegality and immorality, which sometimes just blocks out Catholic social teaching entirely. I can remember a guy at a parish telling me when I was doing research, who was sympathetic to a lot of undocumented immigrants, but he said, well, but it's immoral, because that's why they call it illegal. And he said nothing more. So I think Catholic social teaching asks us to look a little deeper and to start with people and persons first. But that's kind of the other struggle I have, is that it can be there's a kind of blindness sometimes in our Catholic community about the impact of racial and ethnic bias on the immigration system. And this has been the case for over a century with different groups, but even still, it's hard for people to see how certain people get targeted or associated with criminality because of the color of their skin or their ethnic background, and other people don't.
Very good, Brett. Thank you very much. Sister Joanna from the diocesan context.
Sister Joanna from the USCCB.
Oh, from the USCCB, excuse me.
Yes, I think it will be from the national level. Annually, our office, Pastoral Care of Migrants, Refugees, and Travelers, we bring many migrants and refugee communities together to strengthen them, to support them, offer leadership development workshops, most especially to instill the Catholic social teaching in them that will help them to revitalize their faith. These annual events are concrete ways for us to express the ongoing efforts to empower the migrants, like my colleague said, migrants and refugees, and empower them, line them up to what are your rights in the society. And through that, we incorporate them in the parishes and in the dioceses. These annual gatherings helps us to expand our outreach. We have a lot of outreach to ethnic migrants and refugee communities, and trying to make sure we create awareness of issues of social justice, create issues of how to build community, create issues on how to collaborate with other partners like the universities and the rest of the other groups. to see how we can organize them and get new leaders. In doing so, we have a lot of challenges. For example, one of the challenges we have, these migrants and refugees we work with, it's difficult to integrate them into the society, into their community, because of the struggles they have. It is not easy for you to reconcile their deeply held values with the different values of the community they found themselves. Many of them struggle to find access to affordable housing. Many of them are afraid they're not safe, racism like others have mentioned. Many of them experience tension in order to settle in a foreign land that has different culture, values, language. Many of them struggle to build community amongst themselves. We've tried to help them to see how they can have a sense of belonging. Many of them do not even have healthcare. They have healthcare problems. Many of them want to instill their values to their children, but they find it difficult. And many of these communities are mobile and itinerant community that are undocumented. For example, our migrant farm worker community. Many of them don't have health insurance, medical treatment. Many of them lack sick paid leave options. Many of them don't even have affordable houses and overcrowded in the areas they have. All these challenges. And for example, some of our migrant communities like the Haitian community, many of the parishes that even embrace them won't even be able to provide the language. For example, the Haitian that speak Creole. So this makes it difficult for us to instill the Catholic social teaching in them.
Thank you, sister. Thank you very much. Professor Ospino, you want to continue?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Tim. And it's a great honor to be with you and my colleagues on this panel. So in terms of successes and challenges, as a matter of fact, I'm going to start the other way around. I'm going to start with the challenges because I want to compare myself to my dear friend Brett here, you know. So teaching at a university like Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, you know, puts you right at the center of the action. You know, I mean, it's difficult to oversee immigrants in the immigrant community in Los Angeles, Southern California, Texas, Florida, and so on. And then, but the further away we go from the border, you know, immigrants are not as visible sometimes as we normally want to believe. And that's one of the challenges that I see in many contexts, you know, whether higher education, Catholic seminaries, Catholic schools, you know, educational institutions, and even parishes, no? I mean, unless we go to the major urban centers, you know, I teach in Boston, and definitely Boston is a cosmopolitan city where we find a lot of immigrants. But once you move away from the city of Boston, you know, immigrants are numbers to many people. Immigrants are just, you know, a body or a population that we don't know much about, that people don't know much about, and they become very, very abstract, you know. And that becomes the challenge precisely lies in the fact that many people, you know, think of immigration or think of immigrants and refugees as not my problem. And that happens to a lot of students. That happens to a lot of clergy. It happens to lay pastoral leaders. It happens to many theologians. It is not my problem. And sometimes when people pay attention to the questions and the realities of migrants and refugees, then at the level of education, I teach in theology, in a Catholic university, sometimes courses and seminars and webinars about immigration and refugees become boutique seminars. You know, these are for the specialized, special interest, conversations. And we gotta do much better than that. We have to do much better than that. And so, which leads me to the successes, because I mean, I definitely like to complain as a good Catholic, but I also wanna look at the successes at the level of higher education. And I'm very proud, to say that it's fascinating to see the large number of scholars, including many Catholic scholars, in sociology, at the political science level, in theology, in ministry, and many other fields, doing research about the immigrant and the refugee experience. I believe that today we have many more resources than we have ever had in the history of this country to understand, to study, to teach the immigrant refugee phenomenon in the United States of America. If anything, as a matter of fact, we are overwhelmed by the amount of information that we have today. And that is a good thing to have, so we got more resources, and we have also more theologians, more academics, and a few other scholars who are actually teaching this full time, who are speaking about these matters on a regular basis. I am proud to see many of my Latina colleagues who are activists, theologians who are activists, on the field, in parishes, in dioceses, in schools, speaking about immigration and raising awareness about these matters. And the last thing, connected to the world of higher education is that many universities and many theologians have made the decision to require cultural diversity courses from their students. In many of these courses, as a matter of fact, address directly the question of migration and refugees. So we have made significant steps forward, yet we need to do much more, particularly in those contexts when people think of immigrants and refugees as something that is not our problem.
Thank you, Hosffman. And now from the diocese, Sister Hortensia, Diocese of San Bernardino.
Yes, thank you. I'm very glad to be here. So as many of you know, our diocese is an immigrant diocese. We serve 1.7 million Catholics. Many of them, around 60%, are Hispanic. We have European American, Asian American, African American, Native American. We have around 250,000 of our brothers and sisters who do not have the documents of this country and who struggle in their journey because of their status. And so what are some of the successes that I have seen since my privileged time here in 5 years? When I came into the Office of Community Services and Outreach, which before was called Social Concerns, I encountered a wonderful program, which is called the Charity and Justice Certification Course that is offered to all our deacons who are in permanent formation. It is integrated in their classes, and it's part of the program. We had people from the Ministry of Formation Institute in the diocese who are part of this program. I went to the list in the computer. We had around 500 graduates since the program was started. And then I went to visit the parishes and I said, oh my God, I'm sure we have social concerns teams in every parish, and people just very alive in terms of, and committed in terms of social teaching and working and advocating for the human rights of our immigrant brothers and sisters. Was not the case. Many of our parishes, about 25%, 30%, do have a social concerns ministry and have a group that works in Pastoral Migrante. But then all the others, we have 92 parishes, all the others are still struggling. And I guess that's part of the challenges. Once our graduates go back to their parish, go back to ministry, they encounter some difficulties in terms of some of our priests who feel, no, this is too political. My community here, they don't want to get involved. It's difficult. What do I say if I say that we need to defend the rights of the immigrants? Then the other community will say, well, you, Father, come from Mexico or Filipinas, you don't know the laws here, you should respect the laws. Not easy. On the other hand, it has been a great success to invite our graduates to encounter the face of Jesus in the immigrant and the refugee, and to have that personal encounter with their stories, with their suffering. The Diocese of San Bernardino in 2018-2019, as all of you know, received more than 5,500 brothers and sisters who were being released from the detention centers, mainly from Central America. The consulate from Guatemala called the diocese, our office. We consulted with Bishop Barnes. They said, we need a place where we can help, where you can receive these brothers and sisters. We are releasing them. We don't want to drop them off at the Greyhound station. Do you have a place? This was in the morning. We said, when do we need to have that place ready? This evening. Okay, we can do this. We consulted with the team, and of course, the great leadership of Bishop Barnes has helped our diocese to be a welcoming diocese to our refugee brothers and sisters, our immigrant brothers and sisters. We collaborated with Catholic Charities and other groups. We set up Our Lady of Soledad as a sanctuary parish, where we received, as I told you, 5,500 brothers and sisters from Central America, half of them being children. And then what did we do? We invited our graduates from the Charity and Justice program and all the other formation programs to come and serve and journey with our brothers and sisters who were with us for 8 months. Actually, we were receiving brothers and sisters. And what did that do to our community? Of course, it gave a face to the principles of Catholic social teaching and immigration. Many of our deacons who were some iffy about, why do we need to continue to receive so many brothers, so many refugees, and they also need to respect the laws. Yes, that's true. But once, like our deacon John, once he met Jorge from Guatemala, a father from Guatemala, and met Juanito, his son, and Jorge shared with John, we had to come from Guatemala because of the floods. We lost our livelihood. It was difficult for me to make a decision, but it was secure death here or try and find hope by moving north. And Deacon John said, this is the first time I hear a story like that. I have 2 children of my own. If I was in the same situation, I would have also taken that journey. It's that kind of encounter with our brothers and sisters, and facilitating that kind of encounter is powerful. Conversion can result very powerfully from that kind of encounter. We had around 250 volunteers from the whole diocese who came down throughout these 8 months. And the different stories that our volunteers, that our parish leaders have, are amazing. So I do emphasize it is important to continue to hold the Charity and Justice classes, to have these wonderful graduates. But the Word was made flesh. Our call as Catholics is to put the Word into action. And I think at times there's a gap there. We know Catholic social teaching, we know the 5 principles of Catholic social teaching and immigration, but how do we bridge that gap? How do we bridge that gap? And I think that continues to be a challenge. And I think that's why we are here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Hortensia. To those who are listening, thank you for listening, your kind attention. We're going to do a little bit of round robin questions with the panel now. But meanwhile, please do start to send your questions in, because in a few moments we'll turn to audience questions. So Brian and Brett, you both mentioned, as Sister Hortensia just did in telling her story about Deacon John, you both mentioned the importance of stories, both in journalism and in teaching. Now, anecdotes, of course, as sociology would like to remind us, the plural of anecdote is not data. And so some people, both of you expressed this, they hear the story, but it doesn't take them to the teaching. And in fact, there are competing stories, certain, political forces in this country, they have stories of people who were robbed by undocumented immigrants or who were killed in a car accident by undocumented immigrants. So they use the same story approach. How do we, what advice would you give from your context or your experience? How do we move from the stories of real life people to make the connections with Catholic social teaching that stick with people and help them to see what matters?
It's a great question. I think the common thread that runs through the stories we're talking about is the sacredness of all human life and human dignity, and which I think undergirds really the whole framework of Catholic social teaching. And the stories that we tell are meant to humanize, to emphasize the human dimension, the human element of, of what can often sometimes be abstract, sort of philosophical discussions, that, as a reminder that there are real world ramifications for real people. And I think, and the stories of those who have had negative experiences related to, say, undocumented immigration, which, on the border, I mean, those stories are valid as well. And I would say, I think they need to be part of the discussion too. But but I think that there has to be a sort of a common recognition that, that in this debate or in this discussion, we need to primarily, not lose sight that this is all about, people and their desires to live a life of dignity. And how do we do that, on the policy level, on the legislation level, and yeah, it's, that's all, those voices all definitely need to be heard, and we need to keep in mind that this is, that we need to be very mindful of the human needs of our migrant brothers and sisters, as well as the people, that are living in this country now as well.
Brett, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, just I would echo what Brian said about the purpose of the stories is not to provide data, but to humanize the principles. But I think because of that, we have to be very explicit about the connections. We have to connect the dots. And I think that I think there's even a question coming at us about ideals of social teaching. They're not ideals, they're principles, and that's different. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. But also, I think we should. I think sometimes when those of us who teach and talk about immigration, we get too caught up in trying to defend against the kind of negative stories that you're talking about, Tim. And I don't. There's many people we won't convince, and maybe that's okay. We shouldn't try. But I do think that that other stories that we know very well, I can think of even in my own family that when people are talking about undocumented immigrants, they're talking about an abstraction. But for me, this is hundreds of people that I've known, with families and stories, and who I've had dinner with, and I think that's the experience that, as Hosffman noted, a lot of people are missing. It's not a cure-all, the stories, but I do think they're important, and we should make the explicit connections. This is why we need a right to migration, because of what these people suffer here, because of how that they are relieved from that when they come here. But also acknowledge it's not a perfect system.
All right, thank you both. Sister Joanna and Hosffman, you mentioned, both of you, that in your successes, what the USCCB has done, the many efforts that Sister Joanna is part of leading. And Hosffman, your source of hope was the many researchers who are now doing so much more work. So we have many efforts going on. All of our panelists and many others who are watching us right now are involved in those efforts. And yet, from the perspective of immigrants, things now might be as worse or worse than ever. So, how do we get Catholic social teaching and the good things that are going on, the good efforts from the USCCB, the researchers who are helping us to understand, how do we get it to sink in with Catholics? How do we get past the barriers when so much good is going on, but from the perspective of immigrants, it seems like so much is getting even worse rather than better?
I guess I go. Catholic social teaching is a treasure of the Catholic faith. Take, for example, the call to family, community, and participation. How do we organize our society directly to help them affect the human dignity of each person? For example, marriage, family are the central social institutions that must be supported and strengthened. Most often when we meet our migrants, we struggle to see how we can strengthen the family. The Catholic Church believes that we have a responsibility to participate in the society and to promote the common good, especially the poor. These migrants and refugees are vulnerable in our society. For example, Pope Francis says, take care of those that are on the peripheries. Do we as Catholics remember that? As Catholics, we must go to the margins of our communities. We must learn to see how we can serve them better, including their needs, the needs of the poor, the unemployed, the migrants, the refugees. In this way, we may help our community to grow and learn that it is important to have the dignity of people and promote social justice in our communities.
Thank you.
Let me follow up on Sister Joanna's thoughts. I definitely agree, Sister, going to the grassroots, but actually I'm gonna take a different approach, you know? One of the biggest challenges that we have is that a lot of the great research and a lot of the great insights from Catholic social teaching in our spiritual and theological tradition stays in the classrooms, you know, and stays in books, and it never gets out, you know? And I mean, definitely needs to get out to every Catholic, but I'm going to echo Brett in his observation. I mean, there are people who don't want to change their minds, you know? They're already, I mean, one of the challenges that we have in the United States of America is that many Catholics would rather vote or would rather act, you know, out of ideology instead of out of faith, you know? And I mean, there's nothing, once you you set on those ideas, it's difficult to change. But what I want to say is, well, if we want, you know, this research and Catholic social teaching to make a major difference, we need to be strategic. Where is it that we want to make a difference? I mean, we can make a difference at the university academic level. We can make a difference at the diocesan level. We can make a difference at the political level, you know? And once we make that, you know, identify what kind of difference we want to make, then let's start putting people out there, you know, and training people out there. You know, I mean, we need politicians, you know, politicians who actually can, you know, Catholic politicians who actually can bring the best of Catholic social teaching into, you know, to bear upon their decisions and how they make laws and how they advocate, how they allocate resources. Maybe we are not sending the right kind of politicians right now, because sometimes I gotta tell you, it's shocking when Catholic politicians, you know, out there stand for stuff and for ideals that actually contradict the gospel at all levels, you know? So maybe that's part of the strategy that we need to know. And the last thing I wanna say is going back to the stories, you know, I mean, once again, I think that that disconnection, you know, that disconnection between scholarship and the richness of what we have in our faith and what happens out there in the lives of Catholics and at the level of leadership, you know, exists because we lack enough people to make the connections. You know, we are taking too much for granted. We're just hoping that people are gonna pick up the compendium for Catholic social teaching and read it overnight or in a couple of nights. Forget it. People would rather watch Netflix. You know, people are with their families. They are doing many other things. So we need connectors. We need connectors. And I want to highlight a book that I just read. That came out this this fall semester. As a matter of fact, it was released recently in September. And it's written by a lawyer, you know, Linda Dakin-Graham, and but it's by Orbis Press, and the book is called Dignity and Justice: Welcoming the Stranger at Our Border. And it's a fascinating book because it begins with stories. And what the author does is not only takes the stories and then gives us a history of how these people, you know, are facing X or Y realities. And the third part of her presentation connects it straightforwardly to Catholic social teaching. We need to do that. We need to do it straightforwardly and not take anything for granted.
Thank you, Hosffman. Well, before we return to the audience questions, Sister Hortensia, I'd like to bring one question to you, and I really could ask this all the panelists, but maybe you could speak for them. We're talking about Catholic social teaching on migration and refugees. And sometimes people have the idea that this is like the bishop's public policy statements. But of course, Catholic social teaching is not, at its core, public policy statements. It's a way of life. It's not an activity of the church. It's not a ministry of the church. It's constituent of the gospel. To be baptized means that we live this lifestyle. Pope Francis, of course, has spoken so beautifully about immigrants and refugees, but I think even more to the core than that, he's talked about the personal encounter with Jesus Christ and the call to missionary discipleship. So this is not an activity that some do, and it's not just a set of public policies. It's a way of life. It's a full commitment of discipleship. So you've trained those 500 leaders and others in the Diocese of San Bernardino. How do you try to help people see that Catholic social teaching is not just policies or stances on laws, but an actual way of life that's part of the calling to be a follower of Jesus Christ?
Yes, well, thank you for the question. One of the opportunities that we have offered our graduates has been also to do ongoing retreats where we have speakers, refugees and asylum seekers come and talk to them about their experience. And as part of the retreat, as part of the Word of God. And after that, we go into reflection. How do I see my faith connected to this story? How is Jesus calling me to journey with my brother and sister? How is this calling me to deepen my love for neighbor and my prophetic call to make a difference in the world in terms of advocating for the rights of my brothers and sisters who are in the margins in so many ways. So bringing Catholic social teaching not only to the classroom kind of setup, but also to our different spiritual kind of formation and opportunities that we have. We also have a conference every year called Life, Dignity, and Justice. Many of our parish leaders and our graduates come to this conference. We have different theologians, spiritual speakers who come and also again integrate Catholic social teaching into. This is central to our faith. This is not an addition or an optional kind of group that kind of takes the option to strengthen more Catholic social teaching. It is central. And as I was preparing for this kind of panel, I was really struck by the bishop's document in 1998, on sharing Catholic social teaching, directions, challenges, and directions. And there's a part that says, Catholic social teaching is central and essential element of our faith because this commitment to social justice is at the heart of who we are and what we believe. It must be shared more effectively. If Catholic education and information fail to communicate our social tradition, we are not fully Catholics. That's very strong wording. 22 years ago, and we are still here. And we need to continue to be stubborn in this journey. It's not easy. There are some hearts of stone, and we trust in the Holy Spirit and in our continual work together that we are making a difference.
Okay, thank you, sister. Thanks to the audience for all who are sending in questions. Of course, we have a lot of them, too many to address, but let's get started on some. And I would ask the panelists, maybe we could each take a turn on a question, but I'll invite you to raise your hands if a question sounds like it's something that you could address. So here's a very difficult, strong and important question. Two questions actually in one. Shouldn't there be a recognition of the disparity in the power of immigrants and refugees on the one hand, and those of powerful actors who have more voice and influence? Also, are there not inaccurate portrayals that should be challenged when xenophobic stories are told that target, vilify, and seek to further marginalize immigrants and refugees? So should we pay attention to the power disparities? And how do we respond to counteract xenophobic stories that are told to vilify our sisters and brothers? Brett, please.
Sure. No, I think I would echo what the questioner said, that it sometimes sounds...
Brett, your volume is very low again, at least on my screen. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Is that better?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I think it sounds, sometimes the way people talk, especially sometimes in government about refugees and immigrants, it sounds like they have the rest of us over a barrel. So it's a kind of misdiagnosis of the actual situation where a lot of immigrants and refugees are marginalized. They're even trying to be invisible. So so they don't have any power. So it's a little bit, it is not easily recognizable as bullying, but it can be bullying. And but the other thing, when I said before, I didn't think we should concentrate on confronting the xenophobic stories, I didn't mean that we never should. I just meant that I didn't think we should, probably all of us have had this experience where we're engaging with someone whose mind we're never going to change. But in terms of public discourse, we do have to provide alternatives and challenge these narratives that are essentially making up stereotypes about immigrants and refugees.
All right, thank you. I want to keep moving to other questions. I know there's probably much more to say to that, but so many other questions. So there are several questions on here that I can see that are basically asking a question about one-issue voters. One of them put it this way: how do we bridge the divide between abortion and the other elements of Catholic social teaching, especially in the political arena? There's an easy question. I'm sure that many people are asking now, especially as we're on the dawn of eve of an election. But how do we talk about a consistent life ethic and bring in all the issues, as the bishops so eloquently say, from conception to natural death, and include the immigration in that? Who'd like to take that one? Hosffman, I'm going to call on you.
I'll give it a shot. You know, I mean, this is exactly where we are right now in terms of our elections. You know, and I want to go pious on this one, Tim. Let's start by reading the gospel. You know, let's go back to let's go back to Jesus. That's what Pope Francis has told us from day one since 2013 when he was elected Pope. That's what Pope John Paul II reminded us. That's what Pope Benedict XVI said over and over again. I mean, we need to return to the gospel, and I find it troublesome that Catholics who are pro-life, who defend the right to life, you know, at the same time find it difficult to support immigrants and refugees, or the other way around. You know, there is no reason to separate these dynamics. And I think that, you know, by when we return to Jesus, when we have a common start, you know, praying together, reading the gospel together, you know, then we should be reminded about the fact that, you know, we as Catholics, you know, start with the gospel and not ideology or not politics, but it's, you know, our faith inform our politics rather the other way around. And again, you know, I mean, anytime we start splitting these issues, then we have to go to Catechesis 101.
Very good. I would take a second response to that one if somebody's itching to speak. All right, let's go on with another question then. This is from the UK. Can the panel speak to what immigrants can bring to their hosts, economically, culturally, spiritually? So, you know, we were talking a lot about, you know, our view to immigrants. What do immigrants bring to us? Brian?
Okay, well, I can speak from the experience of being a first-generation American whose parents immigrated from Portugal in the early 1970s, and they were in fact part of a huge wave of Portuguese immigrants to this region here in southeastern Massachusetts. And I can say, without the Portuguese, this, you know, immigrants and their children, this region where I am would be very different. Would you know, the Portuguese who came here, for example, they you know, they revitalized neighborhoods, they started businesses, they built churches, they brought with them sort of cultural traditions rooted in the Catholic faith as they practiced it, you know, back in Portugal, that are still major cultural attractions here in Fall River and New Bedford, Massachusetts. some of the summertime sort of cultural feasts, which have Catholic roots to them, attract thousands of people. And that's not even going into the food and the culture and the architecture. That's all now part of the fabric here, in Southern New England. And I could say without, just the contributions of, of my ethnic, immigrant community, this region would be impoverished, I'd say, and that's, and I also look around and I see contributions of previous, immigration waves, the French Canadians, Polish, and now I'm seeing great Central American restaurants opening up, in what were previously sort of run down business districts. So, I think, it's fair to say that they bring a certain dynamism, they bring a vibrancy that, that definitely enriches a community on many levels.
Very good, thank you. I want to point one out here that we got. This is not a question, but one person wrote in, thank you to the panelists. This is actually a prayer request, not a question. So I'm sure many of us bring prayer requests today. I'll just take like a moment to mention this one. If you have the interest to share this, my immigrant friend just let me know her 18-year-old brother told her 3 weeks ago he was going to cross the border into West Texas from Ciudad Juarez, and she has not heard from him since. She is fearful he may have been kidnapped by a cartel. I ask for prayers for him and their family. So thank you, Brinkley, for sending that in, and let's remember that, and I'm sure many people come with prayers on their hearts today. Thanks for taking the time to send that to us. There's another one here. In a world where the trending events capture the media headlines, in what ways the Catholic Church ensuring that its efforts to communicate the migrant refugee stories are not simply forgotten the moment they're no longer headlines? So for example, the migrant caravans, USA-Mexico border, or the washing ashore of a boat dinghy, the little Syrian child that triggered the world to respond to the Syria crisis, etc. I mean, if we're telling stories, maybe Brian, maybe this is for you, but for anybody, how do we compete with the news cycle, which has such a short memory span, or such a short, attention span, it would seem? Brett?
So I think this is why, I mean, the stories are important, and I, in part, was one of the people saying this, but this is why, for example, the research part that Hosffman was bringing up is publicizing some of the larger aspects that are brought out by the stories, and doing that continuously. Because if it's just an argument about stories, then we're always going to feel like we're falling behind. But it's an argument about stories, about the principles of Catholic social teaching, which are sort of evergreen and connected to the gospel, as Sister was saying. And it's also about kind of the larger narratives in society. All these larger narratives that we traffic in all the time, some of them quite negative, some of them quite positive, they come up short, right? That's what the research tells us is, for example, most immigrants are not, desperately poor. What the research tells us is that immigration in general is good for the economy. But those kinds of larger narratives sometimes get lost in the personal stories. And I think it's important that we keep emphasizing those as well.
Yes, Hortensia.
Yes, Tim. So here in California, the pandemic has hit us very, very strongly, as you all know. And a high percentage of our Latino community and immigrant community has been directly affected. And I think as we continue our journey, the headlines may change, but immigration is always connected in one way or another. And so how do we bring that to the attention of our communities and the nation? I know in our diocese, we had a Zoom meeting with almost 900 people to advocate to our governor to offer additional financial support to our undocumented community who were not getting money from the stimulus checks. And so that, we rallied, and, it went well, and we are getting some of those resources. So it's whatever is happening, our immigrant brothers and sisters, we are involved. It's just how do we highlight? How do we, again, speak for their dignity, for our dignity, and continue that voice out there.
So your point, there's an immigrant angle to every story. We got to keep saying that. That's excellent. Hosffman?
Yes, I think that, you know, if this panel was on racism or the place of women in the church or about poverty or about the care for the created order, we could go insane because there are not enough newspapers, and Brian would be writing at about 1,000 stories every day, and that would not be enough, you know? So that's one of the challenges that we have, that there are so many urgent issues and many of them actually coincide. And I think that in response to that question, Tim, what we need is to make sure that there is always an army, even if it is a small army, and pardon the violent image here or the reference, you know, but we need a small army of advocates on immigration that are day and night doing this. I cannot do it all, you know, myself. I cannot be talking about racism and how to educate children and how to build churches and how to deal with poverty and so on. But there are scholars that are doing this. There are journalists who are doing this. There are organizations like the Center for Migration Studies that are doing this. And we need to support those people and those organizations. Every diocese should have at least 2 or 3 people that are constantly doing this. And no, the more we have, the better. But I just want to warn us, you know, warn us about dissipating our energy, not trying to be all for all. You know, I think that the more focused we are, the more effective we end up, you know, being as well.
Sister Joanna, thank you.
Yes, we earlier on said that the migrants and refugees are powerless. They don't have a voice. They're not visible. It is true. Then how do we bring their stories out? We need to have those who have power to speak for them. For example, the bishops. We need all the bishops in the different dioceses to talk about it. It's amazing that even in most of the dioceses, many of them do not know, oh, we have this migrant farm work over there, or we have this refugee community over there. They need to be the voice because people listen to their voices. They should have public relation officer or whoever relates to that area that will be able to speak about it. For example, I want to give you an example. When COVID came, our migrant farm worker communities are the ones at the forefront, they are the essential workers, providing food for all of us. Yet, they don't have masks, they don't have gloves, they are not protected. Many of them had COVID tested positive. So now, what we did, our bishops wrote a press release, but how many read that? To talk about them, talk about their issues and how we can help. So it's one of the ways that I want to point out that it's very important that those who have voice speak for the voiceless so that all of us will be united into one church.
Sister Joanna, I want to ask this next question to you as well. Thank you for that answer. Someone asked about ecumenical efforts to reach out to the migrant and refugee concern. And, you know, there on the abortion issue, for example, the questioner put this in the question. On the abortion issue, we have coalitions between Catholics, evangelicals, other and Protestant groups. Are there similar coalitions that you would point to from the USCCB perspective that are important ecumenical efforts right now to address the concerns of migrants and refugees?
Yes, our office, we collaborate with a lot of interfaith groups to work on issues concerning the refugees and the migrants, on issues of abortion. So, and I don't have a particular one on top of my head, but we, Christian Church Together, we participate with them to bring out some of these issues to forefront. Yes, we do. And there are so many out there.
Brett, you want to follow?
Yeah, just to say that I think I echo what Sister Joanna is saying here in Los Angeles, but I think we should also say interfaith. I think here in Los Angeles, our Jewish community, our Muslim communities have been really strong partners in the fights for immigrant rights.
Okay, very good. Let's move on to another question. One of the greatest challenges, this is a great question as we approach the end of the panel. One of the great challenges facing the Catholic Church is to provide a comprehensive response, a network of institutions and communities. In many cases, the response, as the panelists have mentioned, is partial and often insufficient. How do you understand the collaboration between universities, parishes, schools, social centers, dioceses, USCCB, et cetera, to really give a comprehensive and joint response that recognizes the daily life of many immigrant families? So all of you are from different contexts. How would you suggest that we might work together more effectively so it's the Catholic Church working on this and not just individual entities within the church? Sister Hortensia, you want to start?
Yes. So in the Diocese of San Bernardino, we work very closely with Catholic Charities, Catholic Relief Services, in the Inland Congregations United for Change. This is an interfaith group working for the rights of immigrants and refugees, and also the Inland Coalition for Immigrant Justice. And I think that level of collaboration is essential. It must be consistent, not only when we have a crisis or something's going on, but we have ongoing monthly meetings and we're working at different levels. Right now, we're working on the situation of our brothers and sisters who are detained in Adelanto. Many of them have tested positive for COVID. We had advocated for health attention to them about 2 months ago. It didn't happen, or it didn't happen as it should. So all of us are coming together to advocate at that level. So we must continue that local level collaboration, but also we collaborate very closely with the Justice for Immigrants from the USCCB and other groups. That it's not easy because all of us have like multiple responsibilities, as was said before. But we must keep that connection and that collaboration. It is essential, and there are so many resources and so much experience that we must be a united voice, and we need one another. It's a journey of all of us together. Thank you.
I want to thank Alberto who asked that question, because we got a great answer. That's a wonderful witness and model for what we should be doing. Anybody else want to add to that? Brett?
So yes, as Sister Hortensia knows, I'm also part of a Southern California task force on immigration and refugees. That's the 4 dioceses of Southern California: San Bernardino, Los Angeles, Orange, and San Diego. And it's a wonderful kind of pooling of expertise and experience, because it's advocates, activists, diocesan officials, pastoral leaders, priests, and academics. So we help each other a great deal, and we learn about things we otherwise wouldn't know about.
I want to read, Sister Joanna, did you want to jump in on that one too?
Yes, I want to say that, yes, it's good to collaborate, but it's important to reach people, those at the pew. The faithful, first of all, need to recognize the faith of Christ reflected in every human being, regardless of race, color, age, ability. If you don't recognize them as the face of Christ, all we are doing is useless. So we need to collaborate with one another. We need to educate our people at the local level, at the parishes, in their different parishes, to welcome them, to receive them, to regard them as human beings. Otherwise, the collaboration we'll do will not have meaning. And most often, they regard the USCCB that think we have all the power. We don't really have the power. Belongs to those in the parishes, those at the grassroots, those at the universities that teach. So we rely on you, and we are open to collaborate with the parishes, the dioceses, and the universities so that we all can work together to make a difference.
Thank you. And I want to thank all our questioners. I am so sorry I didn't get to all the questions. We've gotten some, but there are many others. I want to point one out that's not a question, just a sharing from Sister Florence Deacon. Looks like she's a Franciscan sister. And she says this: an example of using stories in conjunction with Catholic social teaching is a voter's guide created by the Justice Promoters of Women's Congregations in Indiana and Michigan, Leadership Conference of Women Religious, Region 7, based on the intersection of racism, migration, and climate crisis. Each brief module uses theological reflection, draws on experiences of those affected, applies Catholic social teaching, and poses questions for candidates and voters alike. reflective voting guide, creating communion at the intersection of racism, migration, and climate crisis. So just pointing that out, and that's an example of what I presume are many other examples of groups around the country who are trying to create initiatives, efforts that link the various issues that inflect on immigration. And I want to move to the close now and make sure we have enough time to do this. For our final, I want to ask each panelist, if you would, think of one concrete example of an action item that you could give to those listening today. What's something you could do to help what our topic today has been all about? How do we mainstream Catholic social teaching to Catholics and within Catholic institutions? What would be the one piece of advice you would give to those listening today of how we could do that more effectively? Sister Hortensia, do you mind that we start with you?
Oh my goodness, that's a difficult question. I would answer with another question. How motivated are we?
What was it?
Can I ask myself, how motivated, what is my main motivation? If we have a why, we will find a how, because there is so much in terms of writing, in terms of, strangers no longer, the document of the bishops 1998 giving us directions in terms of sharing Catholic social teaching. There is so much. But what is it in us that, what do we need in order to be awakened? Do we need another universal crisis, migration and refugees? We have the greatest crisis right now after World War II. Do we need another Pope Francis that is 10 times Pope Francis in advocating for refugees and migrants? What do we need? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Hosffman, you want to go next?
Sure, Tim. My advice is very straightforward, and this is for everyone. Go back to your offices or your classrooms or wherever you have your teaching materials, your curriculum, your pamphlets, your newsletters, anything that you use to teach Catholicism or to share Catholicism, to catechize, and do a serious reading of those materials. If references, straight references to Catholic social teaching are absent, then you have to start rewriting right away. If your syllabus, if you're teaching at a university or a seminary and you lack references to Catholic social teaching in your syllabus or in your courses, then you have to rewrite that syllabus immediately, And we cannot treat Catholic social teaching as just simply good wishes. It has to be intentional, and it demands a major process of reviewing what we use to teach and how we teach.
Very good, thank you. Sister Joanna.
Yes, I will add to say that in developing faith formation programs, I really want to emphasize that it's important for the dioceses to take into consideration both the respect and dignity of a diverse community that will help them to draw all members together. First of all, they should grant the migrants and refugees the right to worship according to their own traditions. They should help them to foster openness, welcome, and then sort of promote evangelization. The church's solidarity and service to migrants and refugees stem from the fact that every human being is created in God's image. So in Deuteronomy 10, chapter 10, verse 19, it says, "So you too should love the resident alien, for this is why you were in the land of Egypt." If we are able to work together with the dioceses, embrace them, welcome them, it will be wonderful.
Very good, thank you. Brian?
So, the point was made earlier that, for a lot of Americans today, immigrants seems to be like an abstract concept almost. But, my thoughts are that, as especially Catholics, we all pretty much have immigrant roots here in the United States. And I had the thought that, that somehow educating us, on our immigrant roots, like somehow getting a better idea of what our immigrant ancestors went through, what their everyday, what their day-to-day life was like when they first got here, and how that could be done. Maybe we're talking about presentations in the parish school, a series in the diocesan newspaper, and some sort of oral history series in the parish hall. Something to just to remind us of who we are, of where we came from, of our roots. And I have the idea that in doing so, that we might not only see immigration as less of an abstract concept, but even be able to relate more to what today's immigrants are going through.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Brett?
Sure. No, I would echo what Brian said about those of us whose families have been here for a long time, we do sort of have immigrant amnesia. But the concrete thing I would focus on is the use of social media. I think that making targeted particular connections to on social media to Catholic social teaching principles, to say we have journalists, we need a right to migrate because journalists can't practice their craft in these countries. To be very specific and not, I think a lot of times on social media we get into polemical arguments, just to state what it is and let it go. State what it is and let it go, but keep doing it. Keep doing it day after day. That's one of my lessons, and maybe one of my spiritual practices as we approach the election is to remind us all that voting is an act of prudence, and that the Catholic social teaching principles guide us in that prudent action.
Well, thank you all for the panel, those great answers. Brian, I was really struck by your answer in particular. All of them had so much to offer. But so often we've forgotten our own Catholic history, and that's something that I teach, so that's something that strikes a chord with me. The scriptures say, be kind to the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, the alien. Remember, you too were once aliens in the land of Egypt. And I take that word remember there in the same way we use that word in the Eucharist. Remember is not just have a historical memory of where you used to be. Remember is try to reconstitute who we are as a people. So remember, you were in Egypt. I brought you out. Remember that those are living realities. And then do not treat others the same. In a certain sense, you can summarize the Sinai covenant in this way. It's God's demand, not invitation, demand that the people be anti-Egypt. What happened in Egypt? Don't act that way. Don't treat others the way you were treated. Treat people with compassion. And I do believe, as Brian said, as Brett echoed, we've forgotten our own history. We've got the stories of immigrants today. We've forgotten the stories of our immigrant Irish and German and Italian immigrants from yesteryear, who would give us a very, very different perspective. So thank you all for your comments today. You certainly help us to remember not just the migrants of yesterday, but the migrants of today. Thanks very much to our sponsors, and thanks to all of you who have listened to this hour and 15 minutes. It's gone by very well. God bless all of you in your ministry. God bless our migrant brothers and sisters. Thank you.